Hello and welcome to episode 151. We just got back from ACPA 25 in lovely Long Beach, California. We sponsored Next Gen. It's a pre-conference workshop for undergraduate students who are considering going into the field, and it was a lovely experience and a great break from the cold, crazy weather in St. Louis. During Next Gen and at our booth at the ACPA Marketplace, we talked with many aspiring and current supervisors about what they need to be successful. So today, I want to go over the three S's you need in your toolbox to be a more successful supervisor. So stay tuned. Now, this is episode 151, so there's an excellent chance I've talked about these topics before, either individually or collectively. But it's a new year, and I thought it was revisiting. So whether you're a new listener or you need a gentle reminder, let's dive in. Strengths. You probably guessed the first S is strengths. And when I talk about strengths, I mean Clifton strengths. Now, are there successful supervisors who don't use Clifton strengths? Absolutely. But I am willing to bet that those people are still living out the strengths philosophy, even if they haven't actually taken the assessment. What do I mean by that? Well, when Dr. Donald Clifton was developing this assessment, what he really wanted to know was which talents correlated with success in different fields. So, what talents do successful lawyers have in common? What talents do successful teachers have in common? What talents do successful CEOs have in common? You get the picture. They did thousands of hours of interviews with people who excelled in their fields and identified over 600 individual talents. But what they found out was that successful folks in certain fields didn't have talents in common. Instead, those folks focused on the talents they did have and then surrounded themselves with people who excelled where they did not. So when you worry about being good at everything or overly focusing on your weaknesses, you waste a huge amount of energy and time. Your talents are the most powerful tools in your arsenal to create the life you want, both professionally and personally. And so when you ignore them to try to be like other people or worry about the things that you're just not so good at, you're trying to use less powerful tools to get the same results. I love Clifton Strengths because it gives you a shortcut to understanding your own talents, and that includes what they are, how they impact how you feel, think, and behave, and how to maximize them. It also gives you a powerful language to better understand and express yourself. And as a supervisor, it can give you insights into how your team members think, feel, and behave. And when you know that, you can talk about how everyone's talents impact the work you need to do, the overall team, and your students. Now, I know this is review for most of you, but remember, because your talents are things that come to you so easily, they're your comfort zone. And you default to them in almost every situation. But because they feel so comfortable to you, it's easy to overuse them or have them show up in situations where they're simply not the right fit. And when that happens, you get in your own way, and that can keep you from being successful. As the leader of your team, the very first thing you need to understand are your own talents and how they show up for you. Again, I've done other episodes going deeper into many of these concepts, but if you don't know how your talents are showing up, there is a fantastic chance that you are getting in your own way. That means, in addition to all the external stressors that you face, you're adding to your own stress. And the same thing is true for your team members. They all have these talents that color the way they think, feel, and behave. And just like you, sometimes they overuse them or lean into talents that aren't the best fit for a given situation. When a leader knows their team member's strengths, when you know your team member's strengths, you can more successfully coach them to be successful, whether that means reaching expectations or preparing for the next step in their career. When you use a strengths approach, you're helping them use their most powerful tools to get where they want to go. And that's why we always start with strengths in our trainings and workshops. When you understand what your talents are, you can customize what you're learning, how to implement it, and how to upgrade where you're showing up in all areas of your life based on the things that you do best. Okay, so the next S, you need to be successful, are supervisor skills. Now, there are many things that fall into this category, but they don't all begin with S, so that would have ruined my title. And as I've said on many occasions, unfortunately, supervisors rarely get the training they need to be successful. So most of us don't even know what we don't know we need to do. So let's keep this simple. I'm going to go back to Gallup and what they found to be the 4 main roles of the manager: performance management, professional development, and employee engagement. Yes, I know that's just 3, but the 4th one is recruiting and hiring. And yes, that is definitely important, but I'm going to skip it here because unfortunately, most of us rarely get the opportunity to hire new folks because of budget stuff. So I think it makes more sense to just focus on the 3 that impact you daily. So I'm going to summarize each of the 3 roles, and then I'm going to talk about what I think are the 3 main skills you need to effectively navigate all of them. So first, we have performance management. In a nutshell, I guess that's a nutshell. That means managing your team so they do the right things to accomplish your collective goals. Most supervisors tend to take a passive role here and just hope people do what they need to do. It's only when that doesn't happen that most supervisors step in. But when you better understand how your strengths work, how everybody's strengths work, you know that means that even though you and your team might be accomplishing some or all of your goals, you might still be wasting a ton of energy and time along the way. And of course, then there's the folks who aren't accomplishing what they need to accomplish. And your job as supervisor is to try to get them into a place where they can do their job. Or if that's not possible, give them the opportunity to pursue roles more in line with their abilities. Wink, wink. Second major role, professional development. And this is going to look different for each person. Some people might need to develop just to be able to meet the expectations of the job, while others are developing to get to that next step in their career. And some folks will need both. We'll get to employee engagement in a hot second, but I wanted to add here that even though professional development often takes a back seat when we're busy or budgets are tight, there is a direct link between how engaged your employees are and whether or not they have professional development opportunities. It seems extra, but the absence of professional development actually leads to lower employee retention. Okay. Speaking of employee engagement, the 3rd main role of a supervisor is employee engagement. Employee engagement is that psychological investment in your job and the organization. That means you and your team members are excited to work there, and you do what you can to leave things better than you found them. Now, you're busy. This might also seem like one of those extra things that, hey, sure, Ann, if I get everything else done, I'll worry about employee engagement. But I cannot emphasize this enough. Employee engagement is just as important for institutional success as student engagement. Why? Because Gallup research shows engaged teams have 10% higher customer engagement. Who are our customers? Students. Quite frankly, that means that employee engagement should be your main focus. And if you do that well, then student engagement will naturally follow. When we only focus on student engagement, we are unintentionally getting in our own way. Remember, when folks aren't engaged, that pesky fourth role of recruiting and hiring comes into play because folks are eventually going to leave. And I think there's a huge retention problem in higher education, perhaps at your institution. And if your team members keep leaving and you're not quite sure why, I can almost guarantee it's related to their engagement, even if that's not what they're saying in their exit interviews. Okay. Now that we've covered the three of the four main roles as supervisors, what are the skills you need to be successful here? Microphone swirled away from me. Okay. I'm going to focus on three main skills, but to do them more effectively, you might need to work on some secondary skills as well. So the three core skills you need are the ability to coach your team, set clear expectations, and hold people accountable. So let's break each of those down a little bit. Coaching absolutely hits all three of these roles. How you communicate with your team individually and collectively is key. And coaching is different than bossing. Telling your folks what to do is quicker and usually easier. And often that's how people manage their team members' performance. But based on the data, people want and need coaching to be successful and engaged in their job. That involves having conversations that gives folks space to learn how to solve their own problems, to explore their own talents, to empower them to act and grow. And simply by making the switch, hopefully you can see how now you've started to focus on professional development in addition to performance management. Okay, so the next skill is setting clear expectations. And this, of course, is related to coaching and clear communication, but it's foundational to performance management and employee engagement. When folks are not clear on what's expected of them, they don't know where to put their energy. And that often means busyness over productivity. It often leads to having to redo things, which is both frustrating and a huge waste of resources. From a professional development perspective, if you're trying to get people to the next level, whether it's meeting basic expectations here or to get ready for a career move, they need to be clear on where they need to go and what they need to do to get there. Knowing how to set and communicate what's expected, especially when things seem to be constantly changing, is a crucial skill. Okay, finally, you need to be able to hold people accountable. And this is about assessing whether or not someone met those clear expectations that you communicated earlier. It is key to performance management, of course. If folks aren't doing their job, there must be accountability or nothing will change. But it is also linked to employee engagement. When other people aren't being held accountable for their lackluster performance, those that are nailing it are going to start questioning whether or not they need to continue working so hard. And from a professional development standpoint, accountability isn't just about repercussions for not meeting expectations. It's also about celebrating when you do meet them. And that's another key engagement element, getting positive feedback about how you're moving in the right direction. So to be successful as a supervisor, you need to both celebrate successes and hold people accountable for meeting the expectations of the job. And keep in mind that all of these S's are interrelated. So knowing you and your team member strengths are going to help you as a coach. It's going to help you set expectations more clearly, and it's going to help hold your team accountable. Okay, so the last S is systems, or rather, developing effective systems. And let me clarify that when I say systems, I'm really just talking about habits, processes, procedures, policies that you have maybe individually, that your team or department have, and that are in your institution. You and your team, everybody, not just you and your team, like everybody on earth, is on autopilot 95% of the time. So when your habits, when your team members' habits aren't aligned with your objectives, when you have processes or procedures or policies that are not aligned with your objectives, you're going to wear yourself out every day doing a bunch of things that aren't actually helping you achieve your outcomes. And that often looks like exhaustion and burnout, but without seeing any meaningful gains. And of course, exhausted and burned out staff members are not engaged. For those of you who feel like you're spending all of your time putting out fires instead of strategically moving your team forward, your systems need an upgrade. We talk about assessment in higher ed, but often in terms of proving we deserve those valuable budget dollars and resources. But it's also important to streamline how you're using those resources, including your most important resource, energy. Are the things you're doing daily helping you achieve your goals, or are they getting in your way? And when you assess, who are you focusing on? Far too often, we assess things based on the needs of just one or two stakeholders, and often that's the student. We value our students because we want them engaged, because of course we want them to succeed, but also we're desperate not to see those retention numbers drop. And that often results in systems where students get immediate access to staff and faculty. And we do this because we're trying to create meaningful individual connections, right? And sometimes that looks like team members getting assigned specific students. So if one of Pat's students comes in, Pat needs to drop what they're doing to answer that student's question or resolve their problems, right? Well, that's certainly convenient for students. And just to make sure they're happy, sometimes we ask them to assess their visit with maybe a smiley or a meh or a frowny face. Yay, they got their question answered and they're on their way. But how is this system impacting your team? Generally, this is a short-term win. Yeah, the students are satisfied, but your team gets burned out, and guess what? It negatively impacts employee engagement. So if your team members can't get any of their other work done during the day because they're constantly being interrupted, that means they have to take work home or work late. And pretty soon, even the most dedicated employee is going to think about leaving for their mental, physical, or financial well-being. And now you've lost all of those one-to-one connections for all of their students. And it's not worth the price. Instead, when you're assessing your systems, you need to think about what is a system that works for all key stakeholders. That's where you need to focus. And when you start to upgrade these systems, you're going to need coaching, setting new clear expectations, and the ability to hold folks accountable. Because you're going to have to retrain your team, your students, and sometimes even yourself to get used to this new way of operating. But the beautiful thing is that when everybody gets up to speed, now those autopilot settings are going to get you exactly where you want to go. Okay. So let's review. Strengths, supervisor skills, and systems are the 3 S's you need to be a successful supervisor. Now, this is a lot of information, of course, and that might feel overwhelming, but even small upgrades and changes can lead to exponential results. The most important thing here is to get started. So think about what resonated most in this episode. There might have been a few things, but one really stuck out to you. What is that thing? Because that's your gut telling you that that's where you need to start. Don't second guess it. So now that you know where you need to start, think about one thing you can do to depending on what it is, better understand and use your strengths or your team's strengths, working on developing one of those key supervisor skills, or assessing and upgrading one of those systems. Don't overthink it. Just get into motion because that's the only way you're going to see positive changes and increase your success.